While most are discussing whether the Saints will keep quarterback Jake Haener or quarterback Spencer Rattler, I think the New Orleans Saints might be looking at it a very different way. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host and your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network. And on today's show, we have our first and very early 53-man roster projection. We'll take a look at how the Saints defense is going to hold strong with familiar faces, how the New Orleans Saints offensive line will be looking to new faces in order to gain that much needed improvement. And look, there's been so much talk about either or when it comes to quarterbacks Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler, but I think the real word we should be using is both. We got all that and much more coming up for you on today's episode. We appreciate you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the Locked On Saints podcast, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs and big championship rounds all dwindle down and summer rolls along. Well, sports are sporting a little bit less than we'd like, but FanDuel is hooking up all of its customers with a boost or a bonus daily, keeping summer exciting over at FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. All right, so I'm going to go through a 53-man roster projection here. It's very early, all right? It's still the end of June. We're still exactly a month away from when training camp is supposed to start, which is expected to be on July 24th. But I wanted to go through this because I'm not really worried about really predicting what's going to be right or wrong. This is more so just looking at kind of the state of the Saints for right now, right? Like where things are right now. So that's what we're going to do as we look through this 53-man roster projection. And of course, we're going to start off with one of the hottest topics of the offseason so far, which has been the quarterback position. Not even just the quarterback position, but QB2 has been a hotly contested conversation all offseason. And while a lot of folks have been looking at this of whether or not it's going to be Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler that backs up Derek Carr as the backup quarterback, I think the New Orleans Saints still keep 3 quarterbacks on their roster, 4 if you count Taysom Hill. So my projection at quarterback is simple. Derek Carr, Jake Haener, and Spencer Rattler. We should be saying both and way more than we should be saying either or, right? For me, I just think that it's really hard for the New Orleans Saints to send one of those two guys, Jake Haener or Spencer Rattler, to waivers. And then even if they do clear waivers, which, look, we do this every year. Oh, there's no way this player makes it through waivers. And then inevitably they still make it through waivers. Shaq Davis, Emmanuel Butler. There have been so many of these different examples. But this is the quarterback, right? It does make things a little bit more challenging for that position. So then the other part of it too is that even if that were to happen, right? You send them to waivers, they make it through after roster cuts, you add into the practice squad, then you still have to deal with the potential of that player being poached off of the practice squad. The NFL changed the rules this season again. When it comes to the emergency third quarterback situation, you no longer have to carry that emergency third quarterback on your active roster in order for you to be able to rely on them should your top two quarterbacks go down in a game. That could mean that the Saints really do kind of do the either or thing between Jake Haener and Spencer Rattler. And I think politically, I give the edge to Spencer Rattler. When I say politically, I mean he's this offensive coaching staff's draft pick. So if it did come down to either or, I imagine the coaching staff would probably lean further into the selection that they made versus the selection that Jake Haener was, which was by the previous regime. But all in all, that's kind of irrelevant, right? Because it feels more likely that this team will still just choose to carry 3 quarterbacks anyway, because why not? Who's it hurting? You know what I mean? Yeah, you could probably make that spot for an additional special teamer, but because you have so many versatile guys all over your offense, plus a Taysom Hill, you might not need to worry about it too much. So if I'm the Saints, I'm going, you know what? Derek Carr is the starting quarterback for now, but he's not the starting quarterback of your future in terms of looking 10, 15 years in advance. So you might as well keep these young guys who odds are either are or might not be your future at the position. But keep the young guys around. Don't risk them potentially being poached elsewhere. That way, when you are ready to turn things over, or when you do need to turn things over, you have two young guys that you can work with, that you could try to build up into these backup quarterbacks or long-term options at quarterback at a later time. Which again, I temper that expectation a little bit around most young quarterbacks, not just these guys. So that's why I think that the Saints keep 3 quarterbacks. A little bit less either or, a little bit more, both and. All right, let's take a look at running back here. This one's simple. 3 running backs kept: Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. The Alvin Kamara chatter is probably louder outside the facility than it actually is inside the facility. I don't think that the Alvin Kamara contract dispute necessarily gets taken care of quickly. I could see this rolling into training camp, mostly just due to proximity to one another, but I'm not super worried about it. Jamal Williams absolutely has a role with this team. Just because you're a zone run team doesn't mean that you run zone runs 100% of the time. You still need that gap scheme guy. You still need that short yardage guy in addition to Taysom Hill. So Jamal Williams has a role there. And I think Kendre Miller's role just grows more and more all throughout the season. As of right now, I have the Saints keeping a fullback. This is where I kind of go against what the New Orleans Saints do. See, 9 times out of 10, the Saints are going to go with the guy that they have experience with. I'm breaking that trend here, and I'm going with Xander Horvath as the starting fullback. If the Saints do indeed keep a natural position-designated fullback on their roster, remember, Taysom Hill could contribute there. Dallin Holker, if he makes the roster at tight end, could potentially contribute there. Foster Moreau can contribute there. There's a lot of different ways for them to continue to build that up. But if they do indeed keep that naturally or position-designated fullback, I think Xander Horvath makes a lot of sense. Him traveling with Derek Foster, the New Orleans Saints' new running backs coach, who came from the Los Angeles Chargers as well. It's kind of one of those little connections and underlying storylines that didn't really get talked about a lot. And I think that does go a long way. Plus his athleticism and being 6'2", his ability to catch the football, all these other things. I think he could be a lot of fun. So I'm going to project him as the starting fullback for right now, only because we haven't really seen one of those two guys stand out. And if you're the incumbent and you're not standing out, it might mean that you're actually trailing behind in these conversations. Let's go to wide receiver here. I actually have the Saints doing something that I don't typically project them to do, which is to keep 6 wide receivers instead of just 5. So when it comes to wide receiver, I have the Saints keeping, of course, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Perry, right? Those are your 3 guys that were here last year. They come back this year. Easy. Cedric Wilson Jr., I think, is a big one. He's the big slot guy. He's the only guy that they signed to a multi-year extension or multi-year deal, even though it was only a 2-year deal. But he's the only one to get more than a year. Bub Means, the 5th-round draft pick out of Pittsburgh, excuse me. And then Equanimous St. Brown, I also have making the roster. So I have them keeping a 6th because I think that the new offensive scheme, you want to expand your blocking prowess out to the slot and out wide. You want to extend that laterally. You want guys that are going to be able to help with blocking in the kicking game and stuff like that. And so I could see a guy like Equanimous St. Brown being able to contribute in all of those spaces. For offensive weapon, because I don't know what position the NFL is going to give him. The NFL might give him quarterback. I'm sure fantasy football players are hoping that he's going to get the tight end designation again, but I'm just giving him his own thing. It's Taysom Hill. We know he's making the roster. We know he's got a big role ahead of him. It should be the most fun Taysom Hill season we've seen so far. And then to wrap up this portion of the show, we'll go tight end. This one's easy too. 3 tight ends: Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and then Dallin Holker. I think those are your surefire guys right now. If Juwan Johnson isn't ready to go at the beginning of the season, then the Saints will have to turn to other guys. Michael Jacobson, the newly signed Jesper Horsted could be an option for them as well. And then maybe, of course, Tommy Hudson, but Tommy Hudson's been dealing with injury, so it's hard to really pencil him in anywhere. So if Juwan's not ready to go, then I think you have to look at one of those other guys. But until then, until we know that for sure, Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, and then, of course, Dallin Holker are the 3 tight ends that I have the Saints keeping as of right now. Coming up next, we're going to dive into the trenches. And when it comes to the offensive line, it's the new faces that have to bring the improvement. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with this 53-man roster projection episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at FanDuel. Yes, a lot of the leagues are all done, but you still got the MLB, you still got the WNBA, and they've all been awesome all throughout their seasons as they roll along here throughout the summer. And of course, FanDuel is here to make sports even sweeter right now. So while things are at a premium, make sure you head over to FanDuel. FanDuel right now is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There is something now for everyone every day, all summer long. All you got to do is head over to fanduel.com/locked-on so that you can get the most out of this summer. You can get in on all the WNBA action. We just had a huge matchup between Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Got more coming up with the Liberty favored on Tuesday by 4 points at home, and much more all around Major League Baseball. You can even get in on some NFL futures. You think Derek Carr is going to pass for more or less than 3,300 yards? They got that. You think the Saints are going to win by more or less against the Carolina Panthers than 4.5 points? They've got that. There's so much for you over at FanDuel. So go and check them out. FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family. For the first time in a while, the New Orleans Saints are going to be looking for improvement on their offensive line, and they're going to be relying on new faces to get that done. We appreciate you very much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 national sports stream on YouTube. You can find it every single day, every single hour, every single minute, all day long over at the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page. Get all the biggest stories from the local experts that cover the teams and know them best. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. That's Locked On Sports Today, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the New Orleans Saints are kind of in a unique situation from what we're accustomed to seeing them deal with, particularly over on the offensive line. First of all, they're in a situation now where they're looking for improvements over on the offensive line. I do think that like the pass protection stuff has kind of gotten a little bit overblown, like the issues in pass protection. Saints didn't allow a ton of sacks this offseason. They were not nearly in that conversation, even within like a conversation of the top 10 teams in terms of sacks allowed. But it was the failure to protect the quarterback, Derek Carr in particular, in moments that mattered most, third downs in the fourth quarter, things like that. And then, of course, the hits that Derek Carr was taking, that was a lot of, and when I say that Derek Carr was taking, I mean that Derek Carr was subject to, there was a lot of what brought on injuries and all this other stuff that kind of forced him into either situations where he was out of the second halves of games, or not playing particularly well in games following those injuries. And you could probably say, well, should have been out on the field in the first place. But look, the NFL is going to NFL. So when I look at where the New Orleans Saints are when it comes to their offensive line, they're expecting improvements here in 2024 than what they showed in 2023. Some of that can come down to changes at the coaching staff, going from Doug Marrone to John Benton, keeping Jari Evans around, all that. That's all fantastic. I think that the other thing that you're looking at, though, is actually, for the first time in a while, brand new faces, plural, all along the offensive line, or at least brand new faces in new positions along the offensive line. So as we take a look at the 53-man roster projection for the offensive line, let me also tell you where I think everyone is slotted to start as of right now on June 24th. Rookie tackle, Taliese Fuaga, left tackle. Nick Saldiveri, drafted last year, second-year guy, left guard. Eric McCoy returns again, center. Cesar Ruiz returns again, right guard. Those are the only two spots where you're going to see the same face. And then at right tackle, Trevor Penning, right? So Trevor Penning originally drafted to be the team's future left tackle. Saints then have to turn around and draft a guy that we assumed was going to be their future right tackle, Taliese Fuaga, after Ryan Ramczyk was dealing with his degenerative knee issues and all these other things that we might not even see him this year. And instead, Taliese Fuaga moves over to left tackle. They move Trevor Penning over to right tackle, with the logic being, hey, it's an opportunity for a fresh start. So for the Saints, their perspective of looking at it is, let's give them a completely fresh start, right? New system, new responsibilities, new play style, new run game, new position. Just give it all to them brand new. Start them off from that empty slate, and then see if that makes it a little bit easier to kind of bring him up. We'll see if that's the case. We're going to go into talking about and debating starters in tomorrow's episode. So we'll be returning to this conversation because somebody that I very much respect actually projects that Trevor Penning won't be starting at right tackle and that a different offensive lineman will be starting over him. that's not named Taliese Fuaga. So make sure you come back tomorrow for that conversation. But that's where I'm looking at things for right now, right? This is the state of the roster at this moment. So the way that I look at it is those are your starting 5 as of right now, because that's what we have seen, OTAs, minicamp, all that. Now, who are the other guys to make the roster to back up? Well, Landon Young, who can play left tackle, right tackle, and can play on the interior. Ali Udo, who could play left tackle, right tackle, and play on the interior. And then I struggled here, but I'm going to go Shane Lemieux, who has that guard center versatility. I was thinking Lucas Patrick as well, but I don't know if Lucas Patrick throwing hands with Trajan Jeffcoat at the end of minicamp might have left a sour taste in the New Orleans or for the New Orleans Saints there. And so, maybe that gives Shane Lemieux a little bit of a little bit of a boost, you know what I'm saying? In terms of getting up there. But he's the guy that has that versatility, can play either of those positions, and has most been used as the left guard behind Nick Saldiveri. And we know the New Orleans Saints typically will keep a player that can play both positions, including center, before they would just keep like a natural backup center, which still drives me nuts from a roster construction spot. But they're the ones that build the roster, not me. They're the ones that are better at it, not me. They're the ones that get paid to do it, not me. So I'll shut my mouth. But I'll go with Shane Lemieux here. Lucas Patrick offers the same ability. It's just that we have seen more emphasis on Shane Lemieux right now throughout OTAs, minicamp, and all that than we have seen for Lucas Patrick. But definitely would keep an eye out on Lucas Patrick throughout training camp and throughout the preseason as well. All right, let's continue our conversation in the trenches here by going over to the defensive line. So that's us looking at the offensive line. Let's start with defensive end here. Got him keeping 5. These should be no surprise. Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. That's your 5. Nobody's really competing with them. Trajan Jeffcoat's had some moments where he's looked really good. Nathan Latu just got waived. He was another undrafted free agent. All that. This is going to be your 5, I imagine. And remember that Tano Passanio as well has had that Achilles tear. So he will not be with the team to begin the season, it doesn't sound like. And so therefore, these are your 5. Cameron Jordan, Carl Granderson, Chase Young, Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey. Peyton Turner, Isaiah Foskey both need to prove that they can be healthy and on the field. Peyton Turner can also benefit from maybe taking on a little bit of that Tano Passanio role, play on the outside and on the inside, have a little bit more of an impact in that way. I think you can do that with Cam. You can do that with Chase Young as well. So should be a lot of versatility from this edge group. And that should mean a lot of opportunities for some really, really interesting NASCAR packages, NASCAR looks, 3 defensive end looks, all that. Now let's wrap this up, or wrap up the trenches at least, by going to defensive tackle. This one's also simple. No big surprises here. Bryan Bresee, Colin Saunders, Nathan Shepard, Christian Boyd. Bryan Bresee, Nathan Shepard, those are your attacking, penetrating 3-tech guys. Colin Saunders, Christian Boyd, those are your big run-stopping 0 or 1-tech guys. When I say 3-tech, what I mean is the guy that lines up in the 3 gap, which is between the guard and the tackle on the opposing side. And then when I talk about 0 or 1-tech, 0-tech is lining up nose to nose with the center. 1-tech is lining up in the gap between the center and the guard. So you generally have one of those guys on one side lined up in sort of that tighter spot over the center or between the center and guard. And then over on the other side, you open up a little bit and have that 3-tech be in between the guard and the tackle. Typically speaking, your 0-tech, 1-tech are your run stoppers. Typically speaking, your 3-tech defensive tackle is your penetrating pass rusher, who can also contribute in the run game, of course. But they're the ones that you expect to be the hyper athletic, big body, but hyper athletic type of guy to disrupt in the backfield. Whereas your 0-1-tech's kind of your bigger bodied guy. Christian Boyd fits that so well. Colin Saunders fits that so well. And I'm really excited to see Colin Saunders take a step forward here in 2024. Now that he's familiar with the system, he should be able to be a little bit more free to showcase the athleticism that he brings. So even though he would be a 0 or 1-tech type guy on typical downs, doesn't mean he ain't rushing the passer. So it should be a lot of fun to watch that position. But that's what I've got looking at when it comes to the trenches. Coming up next, I want to take a look at the Saints' kind of other defensive starters, linebacker, second, third level guys, and special teams. And the Saints just simply are winning again on the defensive side, thanks to familiarity, continuity, cohesion. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. While the New Orleans Saints defense in the second and third levels will have some new faces, It's really the returning guys, the familiar guys that are the ones that are going to maintain the standard of excellence that the New Orleans Saints have set over on the defensive side of the football. We got that coming up for you here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Don't forget, we are your team every day, so we'll be back with a fresh episode tomorrow. Today, we're taking a look at the roster. Tomorrow, let's dive in to the starters, including why the New Orleans Saints offensive skill positions look like they're actually in really, really good hands, and why we could see a surprise starter on the offensive line in 2024. Appreciate you very much for being here. I want to start at the linebackers here as we wrap up looking at the second and third levels of the defense. We'll go linebacker, cornerback, then safety, and then we'll take a look at the specialists as well. But not a ton of new here when it comes to the guys that are the standard bearers for this New Orleans Saints defense. Demario Davis is your starting Mike. Pete Werner is your starting Will. Willie Gay is your starting strong side, Sam linebacker. Then your backups are new free agent addition, Khaleke Hudson, I think has looked really good. DeMarco Jackson, who they invested in a few years ago, going into his the contract year, final year of his rookie contract. And then I'm throwing in rookie Jalen Ford, which is a little bit of a stretch at the moment. I'll tell you why here in a bit. But what I want to highlight here is that when it comes to the standard bearers of this defense, Demario Davis, Pete Werner, we'll get to Marshawn Lattimore, Tyrann Mathieu, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor. Like, we'll get to these guys all throughout, but it's a lot of returning and familiar faces, and that should be no surprise. We know how much the New Orleans Saints still believe in continuity and cohesion, and we know how much they specifically believe in continuity and cohesion over on the defense, which has effectively been the most reliable side of the ball for the New Orleans Saints since like 2017. Although 2017, 2018, a little bit of 2019, you could look at the offense also being reliable, but the defense has just never wavered when it comes to the question of reliability. And a big part of the reason why that happened was because in 2018, the Saints signed Demario Davis, and Demario Davis is going nowhere. So that's the way that I look at this linebacker room. A lot of folks have asked, like, do you think that Willie Gay is going to take the starting role, from Pete Werner? The fact of the matter is that they both have a starting role. And I think we're going to see a lot more 3 linebacker sets this year than maybe we're accustomed to seeing from this defense. And really probably more than we're accustomed to seeing across the entire NFL, if we're being honest, especially with 2 tight end sets and 2 running back sets clicking up in the league. It just feels like they're both going to get starter opportunities because they're going to be on the field at the same time as Demario Davis quite often, I imagine. The other thing is, I could see Willie Gay cutting into some of Pete Werner's snaps in the 2 linebacker sets, which is a little bit more of a specific question. But I think that some of that can be game plan related and down and distance related as well. Like a 2nd and 7 play that you're defending in nickel that could very well be a run play or a passing play by the opposing offense. Maybe you have Pete Werner on the field because you want his downhill pursuit. But then you also trust him to be able to cover an area of the field. Not all areas of the field, but cover an area of the field. Because you're not going to trust a linebacker to do everything, right? But then maybe a 3rd and 9 is a Willie Gay down because you want that guy with that speed, athleticism, playmaking ability to be all over the field for you. Sure. You know what I mean? Like the Saints just simply are less limited now at this position by having signed Willie Gay than they really have been for a long time when it comes to linebacker. So I think that the conversation of, will Willie Gay steal snaps from Pete Werner is always going to be a conversation. But I think the more nuanced conversation is how do you strategically use both of these guys at the same time or individually next to Demario Davis to maximize your production on defense. And I think that might be more so what we end up actually seeing from this team as opposed to one stealing snaps or taking snaps away from the other. Cornerback, no surprise here. I've got them keeping 5, so maybe the 5th one's a surprise, but probably shouldn't be. Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry. The only question is, who's going to start in the slot? Will it be Alontae Taylor? They're going to give Kool-Aid McKinstry the opportunity to compete there. I think it'll be Alontae Taylor. I love the way that they described it, that like the expectation for Alontae Taylor is that his ceiling in the slot last year should be his floor this year. Should is a great word. Great word. Makes you feel a lot of things, a lot of hopeful things. Got to see it. Absolutely have to see it. But I still think that Alontae Taylor can make good on that. And so I'm not penciling Kool-Aid McKinstry in as the starting slot corner at this point. He actually has about half as much experience as Alontae Taylor had coming into the league in that spot. He's always been a perimeter guy. So I look at Kool-Aid's biggest impact being A, coming in for injury, and B, because look, all 3 of these guys are not going to play 17 games. It's just not going to happen. And so having Kool-Aid be able to step in as a starter in any of those three spots, either outside spot or in the slot, is fantastic. But I feel like Kool-Aid becomes a really big asset in 2025 when you either do or don't have a contract done with Paulson Adebo, right? Or you maybe revisit the Marshawn Lattimore future conversation this offseason or at the trade deadline or whatever. Not advocating for it, but we know how these things go in the NFL. The other guy that I have them keeping at that position, because I know what you're thinking, Ross, you only said 4. I'm getting to it. Number 5 here, I've got Shemar Jean-Charles. I chose Shemar Jean-Charles here because his contributions on special teams, the fact that he plays now both inside and out, to me were things that stood out. They really, really liked him last year as a special teamer and the way he was able to help out on those games where they didn't have JT Gray in the lineup because he was dealing with injury and all these other things. I think Shemar Jean-Charles is probably actually a little bit more likely to make the roster than people might think he is because he's not a household name. But boy, is he a talented player. And he's going to give you some depth over on defense. He's not going to challenge to be a starter, but he's going to give you some depth there. And I think that means something. And in what he can do on special teams, I think goes a long way as well. So I've got Shemar Jean-Charles as the 5th corner, along with Marshawn Lattimore, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Finally, safety. Well, not finally, but finally for the second and third levels of the defense, safety. Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, Jordan Howden, Will Harris, JT Gray. It pains me not to put Ugo Amadi on this list. I think that there's a world in which maybe you take Shemar Jean-Charles out, have him on the practice squad, and then put Ugo Amadi on the active roster, or you just try to get Ugo Amadi to the practice squad if you can. In any case, he's going to have value for you as a special teams guy. He's been working as like the personal protector for the punter and all these other things too. So he does a lot of stuff, but it's just kind of hard to find space for him here. Whereas Tyrann Mathieu, Jonathan Abram, those are probably your starters over at safety. We're going to dive more into that in tomorrow's episode when we start looking at the starters. Although I do think Jordan Howden will get more opportunities as he recovers from his offseason procedure and then gets into training camp here. He'll get more opportunities to compete at that box safety role. But Harris and JT Gray are just easy for me. Harris gives you so much versatility, can play in the slot, can play down in the box, can be a dime linebacker for you, can be a corner for you, can be a deep safety for you, can be a robber safety for you, probably in the middle of the field. Like there's just so much stuff that he can do. I think he's an easy selection. And then I choose JT Gray because he's your special teams captain. However, JT Gray is going to have to compete now because he's had trouble staying on the field. So he's not going to ride the reputation of being JT Gray anymore. He's going to have to compete with guys like Ugo Amadi and Shemar Jean-Charles and all these other guys that can contribute as special teamers and everything. So interesting one to watch, but I would never vote against JT Gray without being given a reason to vote against JT Gray. I also believe that the Saints are going to be completely the same right now at special teams. Zach Wood, the long snapper, Blake Grupe, the kicker, Lou Hedley, the punter. There's just nothing I've seen so far from Charlie Smith that is consistent enough to say that he's going to compete or that he is competing at this point with Blake Grupe. Has that real opportunity come training camp, though. And then when it comes to Matthew Hayball and Lou Hedley's just been the better punter so far. He's added the more traditional NFL style of punting to his rugby style, which might make him a little bit more impactful from different areas of the field and all that. So I think that's just going to be one that we're going to have to watch and track throughout training camp. Again, this isn't about really predicting what's going to happen. This is about like, what does everything look like right now? And I haven't seen anything from Charlie Smith nor from Matthew Hayball at this point that says that, oh yeah, those guys are about to upset Blake Grupe and Lou Hedley. So I have to keep them here right now, but definitely going to be entertaining to watch that battle all throughout training camp. All right. And of course the preseason too. All right. We'll be back here for you tomorrow with another episode, taking a look at the starters out of these groups. We're also going to dive in to a little bit more about like the offensive skill position players and how those positions are just in good hands. I mean, the Saints actually look pretty good when it comes to their offensive starters. You just have to know how to look at them. So we're going to break all of that down tomorrow. Appreciate you very much. As always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU. LSU is busy this weekend, picking up some huge recruits. He's got all the info for you. And of course, you can go and check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans, getting you ready for what should be a pretty interesting Pelicans offseason. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you. Maybe that gives Shane Lemieux a little bit of a a little bit of a boost.